Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. John F. Kennedy said, "The ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all." Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for everyone. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, please answer the following two questions. Question number one, would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? Question number two, would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question number one, would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? Question number two, would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? Your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either question or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if your answers to both questions are absolutely not, this program is for you and you should stick around. It is informative, educational, and enlightening, all the while interesting. So stick with us. We will be right back to discuss a very interesting and important topic: the big divide in the country. I'll be right back. I'd like to make two interesting note. Number one, we asked the two questions at the beginning of the program for a very important reason. It's not just to be funny, Actually, it is not to be funny, but rather to weed out any individual who does not have any sense of morality or any sense of decency. This program is catered exclusively for individuals with common sense and individuals who actually are determined to work towards a more perfect union. That's number one, the very important reason we ask the question, to be able to, for you to determine whether you have common sense and you are anywhere interested in the well-being of the country. If not, the idea of listening, watching is useless. The big divide. We have been talking about the big divide for the past two programs, and I invite you, in terms of more detail, to visit the People Branch YouTube channel. This is episode 3 of the program. Now, for several decades now, there has been a refrain in the country in regards to the big divide. Contrary to the big misconception, this problem, the big divide, is mostly caused not by the constituents, but rather by the very individuals who are tasked to legislate in order to solve problems. Now, we're not going to debate the detail of the topic we already debated, but I will present to you the three major factors which have caused the big divide in the country. The first one is the legislative branch and the elected officials. The second one is the ambivalence in the media, and the third one is, of course, the constituents. Now, this is not an error. When I mentioned earlier the legislative branch and the elected officials, this is not a misprint. This is not a misread. In fact, if you watch the previous two episodes, you would notice that the major factors for the big divide in the United States is not the constituent, is not the media, it is the legislators and the elected officials. I provided enough example, and I'm not going to go through with that again, and those are not speculation, they're not assumption, they are actually facts that I provided in the previous two episodes. For sake of recap, I'll mention a few of them here. Without going to the detail, again, if you want to hear about the detail, they are available on the People Branch YouTube channel. Both the legislative branch and the elected officials represent the major factors. They are at the roots of the big divide in the country. And that is despite the fact that most of the time they are pointing fingers to the other side. And that's a game that's played by legislators, by elected public officials, in order to convince their constituents that they are not the cause of the problem, and the constituents should look elsewhere for to find the problem. Now, I'm going to give you the two examples that I gave earlier, and I'm going to build on that and provide two extra examples of current events, things that are happening today, and to show you how much that those problems that we in the country, we are so frustrated about, how ironic it is that the very people we elected to help solve problem, they are the one causing the problem. Number one, 2 months after the Donald Trump took over the presidency of the United States, a $1.5 trillion tax cut was passed. And presumably it was for the sake of the people. 1.3 trillion out of that, 1.3 trillion out of the 1.5 trillion went to large corporations and wealthy individuals. Left is 0.2 to distribute among the masses. Now, there are a few people that I know that have received 40, 60 bucks that are added to their paycheck. And they are very grateful. In fact, some of those individuals, they feel that's the best thing that has happened to them because they get an extra 40 or 60 bucks added to their paycheck. Granted, having just $1, $2 added to your paycheck is better than having nothing. But there is a problem with that money that those individuals are so grateful for. And I already mentioned yesterday and the day before that we will be talking about that particular aspect of the problem, the $1.5 trillion tax cut. So when you look at 40 or 60 bucks on your paycheck, on your regular paycheck, you may feel grateful about it, but not until you find out how much you have to pay for those $40, for those $60. And I'm not kidding, I'm not joking. There is indeed a much heavier price to pay, and I guarantee you that you, your kids, your grandkids, and your great-grandkids will have to continue paying for those $40 that you're receiving today. So it's not a clear cut that you receive it, you're grateful, and you think this is the best thing that has happened since sliced bread. We will talk about that in detail in a later episode. But for the time being, the point I'm trying to make is that a $1.5 trillion tax cut was passed. Republicans have been in the majority since 2010, which means since the 2 years after Obama has assumed the presidency of the United States, the Republicans have been in control of both houses of Congress. Of both houses, rather, Congress and the Senate. And since then, everything that Republicans have done either went against the will of the people, or they do absolutely nothing. Example number one, 62 times Republicans have tried to repeal Obamacare. Of course, they would fail, and they know that because the president of the United States was Barack Obama, who actually happened to be the one behind the Healthcare Act. So there is no way in the world that Republicans could have succeeded. That's besides the point, because the point is 20 million more people, Democrats and Republicans, were added to the healthcare system, which means 20 million plus people could afford coverage, had coverage. Hardly a small number. And yet, Republicans did not want those 20 million people to be covered, and they did everything possible to prevent that. So when I say that the legislators and the elected officials are at the roots of the problem, this is not at all an exaggeration. It is something that's good for the people, not for just Democrats, for everyone who could not afford health care, everyone who had a pre-existing condition, everyone who was younger than 26 years old who could be covered under their parents, all of those people, Democrat, Republican, would take advantage of the healthcare plan. Republicans said no. They are at the roots of the big divide in the country. The people want it, the legislators don't. In fact, if you remember, most governors in most Republican states, if governors control the state, for instance, Florida, they automatically prevent the healthcare plan from being implemented in that state. Who were they hurting? Not Barack Obama. They were hurting the people of the state. The big divide in the country is caused by the very people we elect to solve problems. I'm not making any argument that Obamacare was perfect. This is not the argument here. The argument is to help you understand that you don't have to look the other side, because that's what Republicans who have been in control for 8 years now, that's what they do. They prevent the constituent from benefiting of policies that could have helped them. And then they turn around and then they blame the other side and they tell you it's the other side problem. It is not a path for Democrats. It so happened that for the past 8 years, Republicans have been in power and they have been behaving in that way. So they are at the roots of the big divide that we are talking about. Mitch McConnell, day 2 of Obama administration, had a press conference and said, our number one priority is to deny Obama a second term. Translation, they will do everything possible, oppose everything that Obama brings to the table in order to make certain that he fails, so that people would not have any incentive to vote for him at re-election time. Yes, you heard correctly. Legislators and the elected official, whether it's governors, mayors, they all, senators, congressmen, they are at the roots of the problem in the country. Now, the past couple of days, you may have heard or you may have seen that there were a number of protests on the street. I think there was a protest on the street, and the reason for the protest was because there were a number of people who found out that the Trump administration has been doing something very underhanded and not for the benefit of the people. What they've been doing is the enrollment for people to get into the healthcare system is open. And of course, it so happened that the healthcare that is currently called Obamacare is still the Healthcare Act that's still in existence, that's still, because it was never defeated. And the last time that Republicans tried to kill it was when John McCain voted it down. So Obamacare is still the law of the land when it comes to healthcare. Now, a couple of days ago, there were protests on the street. And the reason for those protests was because there was the Trump administration has been doing something really Machiavellic. Now, Republican did mention during the whole time that Obama was in the White House that the Health Care Act, Obamacare, was so bad that it will die on its own. After they said that healthcare was going to cause job, that did not happen. After they said that the healthcare was a death funnel, and people found out that's not the case. After they came up with a number of literally lies to scare people away from the health plan system, and all of that failed. Now what the Trump administration is doing is shortening the time that people have to enroll in the plan. And what they're doing, especially Sundays, most people go to work Monday through Friday, and they have Saturday and Sunday. And some people, they use Saturday to do their little chores. And on Sunday, they go to church, and they would use that the rest of the time to relax and go to the healthcare.gov and sign up for the plan. So what the Trump administration is doing is using that time for the enrollment where most people would be free to do that, and they shut the website down. They call it maintenance. Now, you may not know anything about how this whole thing works. Maintenance doesn't have to happen for a whole day. That's number one. And number two, they could have scheduled the maintenance to start, let's just say 9-10 p.m. on Saturday night, and then up to 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. And guess what? That's ample time to do maintenance. But what they did is, and that time also is the time that people are sleeping and they're going to church in the morning, so it would not really disturb anybody. So when they come out of church, they could have easily go to healthcare.gov and enroll. But they already have the data, and they seen the information that the bulk of the people, they have Sunday that they get on healthcare.gov to enroll. But instead of letting that happen, the Trump administration saying, let's just shut down the website and prevent people from signing up. That is one underhanded thing and one Machiavellic thing that the Trump administration is doing. I'm not here really to discuss the Trump administration. I'm here to provide example to show you that the very people you elect to solve problems are the very people that are causing the big divide in the country. So they're not doing anything for you. They're actually working against you, against your well-being, against your... It's mind-boggling that the individuals you elect to represent you, the individual you voted for to represent you, are the very individual who are doing everything possible to make your life miserable. So it is not an exaggeration when I mention that Republican legislators and elected officials, governors and mayors, they are currently the very individual who are at the roots of the big divide in the country. Now, as I mentioned, that's the number one, the one that are mostly responsible for the big divide. There is the ambivalence in the media and the constituent, which we will talk about. Those are the two bulleted points we will talk about in another episode. But that major point, which is the legislators and the elected officials. We have been talking about that for the past 3 days because they deserve that much time. Because no one would believe that you would go to the poll and vote for someone, I'm assuming, because that's the reason I cast my vote for. If I vote for someone, it's because I'm saying that I trust that individual to do things that would benefit me or would benefit people in the state I live. Not just me, but my views, the views of the people in the state I live. That individual, whether it's a congressman, a senator, or the president, would actually do that, not work against me. But it so happened for the past 8 years, Republicans have been doing exactly that. Now, they are very good at pointing fingers at the other side. They tell you it's the Democrats who are doing this and that. And if you've been listening, you have been hearing Donald Trump calling the Democrat obstructionist. Republicans have been extremely good at pointing fingers, but you don't have to take my word for it because, as I mentioned, I have already put on the People Branch YouTube channel 2 episodes of this program with examples that show you that for the past 8 years, Republicans have been working aggressively and doing things that actually go against your well-being, against the well-being of the country. They're not doing that for you. When they try to kill Obamacare, or governors do not offer a way for you to get coverage if you have pre-existing conditions, are they hurting you or are they hurting the former president? Obama doesn't have anything to lose. So here it is what has been going on. Now, whether you're a Republican or not should be totally irrelevant, because the reason you would vote anybody is in office, and don't vote someone in office just because the person has that very narrow view of something and then all of a sudden this is the reason you vote the individual in office. And that's the reason we are where we are today, because we have a number of individuals who have been in Washington for decades, and yet those individuals have been working against your well-being, but for reasons that are beyond logic, election in, election out, you've been sending those people back to Washington. Now, those people who are doing the protest now, the past couple of days, that's what's been going on. Those pictures you're seeing on your screen are people who have been protesting against the Trump administration Machiavellic Act, which is to bring the website down and prevent people from enrolling. Now, if the program is so bad as the Republican claim, then people would just stop enrolling. Why do go to that length and prevent people from taking advantage of something? If it's that bad, you don't have to tell me it's bad. I'm just going to stay away from it. I guarantee if you're walking down the street and there is a smell that's bad, you're not going to continue going towards that smell. You'll try to find a different way, a different path. If you're about to do something and it's clear that it's bad, you're not going to continue doing it to find out what's going to happen. So as you can see, if lying to you doesn't work, and which is what Republican legislators, governors, mayors, and now the President of the United States have been doing, and because it doesn't seem to work, that in relation to the healthcare system, Since it doesn't seem to work, now they resort to something else, bringing down the site to prevent you from having the opportunity to enroll, because there is just a window, and once that window is closed, then you're out of luck. So why would anyone do something like that? And that individual, you picked that individual, you elected that individual, and you say, I trust you're going to do the right thing by me. I trust you're going to do things that benefit me, that benefit the rest of the country. And yet instead, you have a number of those individuals who are doing exactly the opposite. So when you stand steadfast supporting someone who work against you, the question is, why? Why would you continue to support someone who is working against your well-being, the well-being of your individual in your state, the well-being of people in the country? This is not the reason anyone votes for an elected official. Now, those examples I gave you, including this one, may be considered as past example, but here is an interesting example that's been going on lately. Now, a picture of Lindsey Graham, of course, is the picture that really depicts the demeanor of the Republican Party for the past 8 years towards the constituent. There is no better way to explain what the Republicans have been doing the past 8 years. They have held the majority in both houses. They have worked continuously against the wishes of the people. $1.5 trillion tax cut. 60% of the people in the country opposed it. Republican passed it. The Obamacare that they have been trying to kill for the longest. More and more Republicans are joining once they find out what it does. In the beginning, there were a lot of Republicans, mostly Republicans, who opposed it because they were lied to by their legislators, by the congressmen, by the governors, by the senators. They were lied to, so they stay away from it. Now, as they're getting more and more information and getting better and better understanding, so they joining or they signing up for Obamacare. So after Republicans have lied to you over and over and over and find out that it didn't work, now they're using different ways to prevent you from taking advantage of something that is good for you. This is not a representative that's working for you. This is someone who is working for his own selfish agenda. Now, as I'm talking, you may be aware that there is a midterm coming. 26 days left before this fateful November 6th election. What is happening today is something that is unconscionable. Now, if you are a Republican and you see that a Republican governor, senator, congressman, mayor is doing something that benefits you, now you may be elated. You may like the idea because, hey, he's doing something that I like. Now, there is always a problem with that, because what makes the United States a great country is not the fact that when you have a Democrat president, he only takes care of Democrats. And when you have a Republican president, he only takes care of Republicans, until Donald Trump, that is. Because Donald Trump is an exception to what we're talking about. He just doesn't care about anybody else. Donald Trump only cares about Donald Trump. If you benefit of something Donald Trump does, don't think it's because he does it for you. It so happens we call that byproduct of something, an action. But it's not geared towards you. It just so happens you benefit of it. The $1.5 trillion tax cut was never meant for you. Case in point, 1.3 trillion out of that went to large corporation and wealthy individual. Obviously, it wasn't meant for you. So, to get back to the subject at hand, when you have someone you voted for, or someone who represent you, who is in your state, who represent you, now when that individual does something that benefits you, now if you are a selfish individual, you may be elated because it does something that benefits you and is a disadvantage for the person next door who happens to be a Democrat. So you are glad, you are elated. And ironically, if the shoe is on the if the foot is on the other shoe, you won't be happy. So the translation is, it's not right. That's what that means. If your representative goes and does something that makes you feel great, but it hurts somebody else, then your victory, your joy will most likely be very temporary, because you also have to understand that the shoe will not stay in the Republican foot forever, which means sooner or later you are also gonna complain about the other side. The United States of America is a republic, and the system that's in place is a democratic system. What that means in plain language is everything that ought to be done must be done based on a majority, which means if the representative in Washington, currently the Republicans are in the majority, if they were doing things for the sake of the people in the country, the $1.5 trillion tax cut would not have passed. And the reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, 60% of the people in the country oppose the tax cut. That's a majority. But the representative, in that case Republican, because they're in the majority, they figured that they can do it, and it doesn't matter what we think. We as the people, it didn't matter what we think. They just passed it. Those are the people we keep sending to Washington we keep sending those same individuals to Washington to represent us. This is bad for the country, because those people, the legislators, the governors, the mayors, they are the one who are responsible for the big divide in the country. So when we are talking about big divide, yes, the media seems to think that the people, the constituents, are so divided that that's what's causing this problem. But as we will discuss on the next bulleted point, it's really not the people. It's the individual, the legislators, the elected officials who are at the source, at the roots of this problem. Isn't that something? That we have people we elected to solve problems. They're the one creating that problem, those problems. Isn't that something? Well, when we come back, we will provide to you something that's currently ongoing, another example of how permanent that problem is today within the Republican Party, and everybody almost they synchronize the way that they decide to hurt the country, to hurt everybody that's expecting them to solve problems. And it is mind-boggling that's the case. Don't go anywhere. When I come back, we will discuss that aspect of the conversation in order to provide you a better understanding as to why such a big divide in the country.
Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth
and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore.
We are discussing how our elected officials, mayors, governors, senators, congressmen, are at the roots of the big divide in the country. I know we have been hearing that the media has been pounding this notion that there is a big divide in the country every time that they see a senator doing something that's at the roots of the big opposition between Democrats and Republicans. But what unfortunately the media fail to understand, or most in the media, that according to our research here, the fourth branch, there are three major factors which cause the big divide in the country. The first one, which is the biggest one at the roots of the problem, is the legislators and elected public officials. We're referring to mayor, governors, councilmen, and so on, as well as the legislators that we, the people, elect to represent us. The individual you're looking at is Brian Kemp. He is the current governor of Georgia. And as you can see on the nameplate, right underneath his name, is also the Georgia Secretary of, is responsible rather for the election, for the voting aspect in the state of Georgia. Now, it seems it is a conflict of interest because he is running to become the next governor in the state of Georgia. Now, it would be, by any analysis, conflict of interest that this is also the individual who is responsible for the integrity of the voting system. Now, you could say, well, if he's an honest man, no big deal, right? Yes, you could say that, but there is currently a problem in the state of Georgia. There are 53,000 people who have been removed from the list of individuals who are eligible to vote, who have been voting, and who so happen that their names have been removed from the roster of voters in the state of Georgia. The question is, why? I might as well add that 70% of the people who are victim by that gentleman you're looking at, he's responsible for that problem. 70% of those people are blacks and Hispanics. Now, it is by sheer accident that what I'm talking about come to the public's knowledge. And by sheer accident, I meant by sheer accident. It's an individual who has been voting in the state of Georgia and who was helping another individual through the process, And of course, by using her own record, trying to show that other individual how the process works, that's when she also found out that her name has been removed from the voters list. Which means not only that gentleman who is running to become the next governor of Georgia, not only has he done that, but he has not notified any of those 53,000 people that they have been removed from the list and they need to be re-registered or they will not be able to vote. Those 53,000 people are people who have been voting in the state of Georgia. They're not new voters. You're talking about conflict of interest? This is not just conflict of interest. Remember I mentioned earlier that the elected officials, our representatives, are the very people at the roots of the problem that we have in this country. And in the past 2 episodes, I provided ample example of that. Today, because Republicans are in the majority, they have been responsible of doing things that are completely against your well-being. Now, you would think that someone who is running to become the next governor would want everyone who needs to vote, right? If you are a Republican, by now, you must be already indoctrinated with Republicans talking about voters fraud. Because as I mentioned earlier, the way that usually after lying to you about a situation, they usually resort to something more nefarious, more Machiavellic in order to fulfill their agenda. Now, it is not just today that they've been talking about voters fraud. And from time to time, they pick one example of something that happened and they say, see, we've been telling you there is voters fraud. So it is no surprise that that gentleman, Brian Kemp, excuse is trying to prevent voters fraud. Which is fine, because why not preventing voters fraud? If there is voter fraud, then there should be some measure in place to prevent it from happening. But 53,000 people who have been voting, not new voters, people who have regularly voted in Georgia, and that individual that I mentioned earlier in the example has been voting in Georgia for the past 6 years. So this is not anyone new. But it so happened she is also part of the minority group. She is Hispanic. And she found out the hard way that her name also was removed from the list of those who already registered. But why? Why would Brian Kemp do that? Wouldn't he want vote from those people as well? Now, first thing first, there has been a study conducted. Let me show you the reason that Mr. Kemp is so gung-ho about removing those 53,000 people from the list of those who have been voting in Georgia. First, let's take a look at what seems to be, in my mind anyway. First, I mentioned to you prior that there is a conflict of interest when an individual is seeking the office, a particular office, and that same individual already responsible for another office which is responsible for the outcome of the election, then automatically it is a conflict of interest. That individual should relinquish that task of being the individual to ensure integrity in the voting system, because he is seeking the another office and there is a conflict between those two offices. Now, Brian Kemp may be interested in deregister 53,000 individuals who have been voting in the state of Georgia. 70% of them, which means more than 35,000 of them, 70% of them are minority. And guess what? Stacey Abrams, that the individual who is running against Brian Kemp. See the problem? Stacey Abrams is running against Brian Kemp. She is a black woman, and she seems to have been very successful at presenting her message, her plan for Georgia to Georgians, including blacks and Hispanics. So you see the problem? We're not here to discuss race relations here, but we're here to explain that our system is a democratic system. And once you have an individual who is trying to undermine that system, is not undermining it for Democrats, is undermining the system. And that is a problem for the country. So when I mention that Republicans are at the roots of the big divide in the country, the examples are numerous. And example after example after example prove that Republicans and the majority, mayors, governors, senators, congressmen, they all working diligently, continuously, steadily to undermine our system of democracy. The way they're doing that is by causing a big divide among the constituents. So the big divide that the country has been talking about for so long, that the media has been using this notion, it's a big divide among the constituents. It is not so. It is the elected official, governors, mayors, senators, congressmen, councilmen, secretary of state, they all using their position to expand the divide between people. They are the one that's causing the problem. Instead of solving problems. Australia, for instance, it is mandatory for people to vote. If you miss voting at election time, the first time they penalize you, it's not a lot of money, but $20. And if you are a recurrent individual who decide not to vote the next time, they increase it by $50 to $50 rather. Here in the United States, we have the very individual legislators, congressmen, mayors, senators. Those are the very people who should encourage individuals to take part in that aspect of our democracy. They are the ones that's helping crushing democracy in America. Elected officials, congressmen, senators, mayors, governors, they are at the roots of the big divide in the United States of America. Remember the picture of the people protesting on the street against the Machiavellic Act of the Trump administration for during the enrollment of the healthcare? Remember that? They weren't just Democrats. In other words, we have unity in the constituency. People, both Democrat and Republican, know that it's good for them and want to enroll, but the people who are preventing it from happening are the people that Republican elected President of the United States to do things to benefit them. Those are the people that are doing things against them. This is the roots of the big divide. Now they're always pointing finger to the other side. It's the other side. It's the Democrats. For the past 8 years, Republicans have been in control, and they use every opportunity to divide, to expand the divide. Case in point, that's my last example to show you that it's not. The problem is not individuals. It's not the constituent. It's the elected official. Today, it is exclusively the Republicans. The question is why? Why would someone you voted for, you sent to Washington to represent your views, to argue your case, the case of your state, and that individual is working against your best interest? No, it's not the Democrats. In fact, if anything, for the past 8 years, Democrats have been serving as a stop factor to prevent Republicans from going wild into doing things that's really very bad for the country. Now, here's the last example. This, we've been talking about the Georgia election. It is something that should be of concern, not just to Stacey Abrams, not just to people who support her, but to everyone living in Georgia. It should be of concern that you have the Secretary of State who's supposed to ensure the integrity of the election in the state of Georgia, but he is the one behind creating the problem. Now, just a final note on this aspect of the voters' fraud before I move on to my last example. Mr. Kemp claimed that he's trying to prevent voters' fraud, right? But let's look at a very interesting thing about that. Now, take a look at this map. The darker states in the map are the states that have suffered voters fraud. Hold your horse. I could already hear you say, "Oh, then he has a reason. He has a reason to be worried." The darker shade states rather are the ones that had suffered some voters fraud. But listen very carefully and see that the drumbeat about voters fraud is much ado about nothing. According to a research by News 21, Georgia, from 2000, year 2000 to today, there has been 2,068 alleged voters fraud. Not in the state of Georgia, in total, from 2000 to 2018. I don't know if you're already doing the math here. It's almost a decade now. Actually, almost 2 decades. From 2000 to 2018. Almost 2 decades. 2,068 voters fraud. The 3 states you're looking at in your screen are the states that suffers a total of 2,068 voters fraud for 2 decades. 20 years. Years, 3 states, 2,068. You take 2,068 divided it by 20, you get approximately 100 some. And you divide it by 3. Approximately, let's just say 37. It's not that many, but we'll round it up to 37. So you have 2,068 voters fraud in 3 states for 2 decades. Two decades is 20 years. So you have approximately 100, I'll round it off to 105, 110. You divide it by 3, you get approximately 37 voters fraud in 3 states for 20 years. Rather, per year. That's what it would come to. Now, it's negligible, extremely negligible, because what the other side we didn't talk about is the fact that millions and millions and millions of people are voting. So it's like saying that you have 37 people who have alleged voters fraud, and mind you, those voters fraud fall into very different categories. I'm not going to go through that because we really having also some of the research being done on that aspect as well to talk about it in general. So I'm not going to go into the details. But the fact remains that the idea that Brian Kemp purged 53,000 individuals who have been voting in the state of Georgia regularly and claim voters fraud is preposterous. And to make matters worse, he did not even bother to notify those people that they would need to re-register if they want to vote, which means it was an underhanded action by him, because 35,000 of those people belong to the minority group, and he is afraid that Stacey would benefit of those people. The big divide in the country is caused not by the constituent, but by elected officials, by legislators. The question is, why? I'll be right back.
Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday.
Remember, I mentioned earlier that the big divide in the country is caused by the legislators and the elected officials. A few weeks ago, there was a big uproar in the country, especially in Washington, during the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to become the next justice, Supreme Court justice. As we already discussed, Republicans overwhelmingly wanted Brett Kavanaugh to sit on the Supreme Court. Democrats wanted just the opposite. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about, because the topic is to prove, to show example after example that the Republican Party, who is now in the majority, have worked diligently, aggressively, constantly, consistently to do things that are contrarian to the wishes of the people. The United States is a republic. It is a democratic system. Things get done in the United States with a majority. Without having to rehash the ugliness of the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, suffice to say that he only had 38% approval of the population. Just 38% of the people in the country would approve of Brett Kavanaugh to be the next justice to sit on the Supreme Court. in a country where the legislators would work on behalf of the people, Brett Kavanaugh would not have been on the Supreme Court. And the reason is because the way that it worked in a democratic system, the representative would work according to the people's wishes, to the people's will. But as it is obvious, that's not what happened. The Republicans in Washington voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. As I started from the very onset, and I mentioned over and over and over again that, and I provided example in the previous 2 episodes, and I also provided a few examples here today, that over and over and over again, the Republicans who are in the majority have worked against your best interests. They do not care what the majority thinks. They only work based on whatever their own selfish individual agendas are. So yes, Republicans are legislators, governors, mayors. They do not work for your best interest. They do not have your best interest at heart. Not because I say so, but because they have acted consistently against the best interest of the majority. They passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut. 60% of the people in the country opposed it. They put Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. Guess what? 62% of the population opposed it. And the list goes on and on and on. Yes, you may be one of the individuals who wanted Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. You may be elated. You may be one of the individuals who may have wished for the tax cut. But the way that it works in a democratic system is your congressmen, your senators, your mayors, your governors should do things based on the majority, not to please just you, not to please a minority. That's the way it works. So if you are elected today and you are in the minority, now when the table is reversed, would you also be elated that you are in the majority, but it's not what you want that goes? That's why it is absolutely important when the majority wants something that even if it's not good for you who would be in the minority, but it is to your benefit to support the majority. That's how it works in a democratic system. And if you don't do that today, you would not have any way of complaining tomorrow. I'll be right back. So the expression that I've used over and over and over whenever I have a chance, the privilege to talk to people, whatever political affiliation you may belong to, is the following. True democracy cannot function, cannot work, cannot exist unless and until we fight for the right of even those we disagree with. So even if you don't like your neighbor, even if you don't like the Democrats, even if you don't like someone who is going to benefit of something, but if that individual is member of a majority, it is to your benefit to fight for that individual. Because in order to preserve the system of democracy we have here in the United States, everyone, not just the group that's benefiting, everyone has to fight to preserve that democracy. Because if you're being pulled apart, and that's exactly what Republican legislators, governors, and mayors are betting on. And that's why you keep sending them to Washington, despite the fact they do not work for your best. They do not have your best interest at heart. So you keep sending them to Washington. And they want that big divide to continue to exist, because that guarantees their job in Washington. The bigger the divide, the better it is for them. They're not doing the job. They're dividing the country. And yet, election after election, they tell you it's the other side. And you buy into it. But look at all the examples that I gave you and judge for yourself that it is indeed true that for the past 8 years that Republicans have been in control of the two houses. Everything that they have done goes against your well-being. Take any example you want, and you'll find out that's the case, and it works for them because you keep sending them back to Washington. I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time for a discussion of the next bulleted point, which is the constituent. We mentioned there are 3 major points that's causing the big divide in the country. First, it's the legislators and the elected officials. And we discussed that at length in 3 separate occasions, 3 episodes. We show you example after example that the Republican legislators, the governors, the mayors, they are at the roots of the big divide in the country. And the next bulleted point is the constituent. We're going to take a look at what you, the constituent, have been doing that's also contributing to the big divide in the country. Thank you for watching. I am MD. I hope to see you next time.
The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.